40 ships, 2,868 cannon. So Nelson is outgunned and outnumbered. At the time, typically naval warfare was a sign of strength against strength. The two fleets would float up against each other in parallel lines. They'd shoot at each other until somebody got tired of it. Then they'd go limping off. There's a reason for that. It sounds silly, but there's reasons for that. One was concentration of firepower. All your cannon are facing sideways, so it makes sense to line them up. You want to avoid friendly fire. The other reason was more subtle. So imagine this. You're an admiral. You're commanding 33 ships. You're in the middle. You want to issue commands to the other ships. How do you do that? Any guesses? Yeah, flags. That's why the admiral's ship was called the flagship. And so in order to make sure your whole fleet had line of sight to your flagship, it was just easiest to line them up. That way you knew that everyone could actually see your command structure. Nelson, going into this battle, knew if he was fighting strength against strength, he would lose. Maybe at the best he could squeak out a draw. More likely he'd lose. So here's what we did. In the weeks leading up to the battle, he had all the captains of his ships meet on his flagship for dinner every night. In that dinner, part of it was celebrating the camaraderie, the brotherhood. He called them his band of brothers. But part of it was explaining the two halves of his strategy. The first half was he was going to, instead of lining up in parallel to the enemy line, his fleet, the red ships, were going to approach the enemy in two perpendicular columns. His thought process was, if I do this, I can cut out the bottom third of the enemy's line, and by the time they swing back around, it'll be too late. The other thought process was he was going to point one of the lines straight at the enemy flagship. If he takes out the enemy's command structure, they'll just crumble. Now, this is a high-risk maneuver. While those two lines are approaching the enemy line, they're taking fire that they can't return. So Nelson puts his two strongest ships at the very front of those columns. One of them was his own ship. Nelson was at the front of one of these columns. That was the tactics of his plan. However, he also said to his captains, after we do this, I can't possibly predict what's going to happen. Who knows? Who knows how this is going to play out once we execute this side of the strategy? So once we do, you have it within your degrees of freedom to figure out what to do next. Essentially, find the enemy ship nearest you and figure it out. That's what he told his captains. Those are the two halves of his plan. So morning of the battle, it looks more or less like this. The tactical side of his plan works exactly like planned. Takes out the enemy flagship at the beginning, cuts the enemy line into three. Now, he told his troops before the battle, don't even look at my flagship, because I'm not going to issue commands during the battle. It's a good thing he said that, because in the opening minutes of the battle, he dies. He was on one of the lead ships, after all. By the time the smoke settles, the British sink or capture over 20 of the Spanish and French fleet. The British didn't lose a single ship. The victory was so lopsided, at a time when people actually thought that the defeat would be lopsided, that this battle was studied ad nauseum, because they realized there was more to performance than we really understand.
So this scenario, and many, many others, have taught us that there's actually two types of performance. The first one is what we call tactical performance. And this is how effectively you execute the plan. The other type of performance, however, is adaptive performance. And this is how well you diverge from the plan. One is how well you stick to it. The other is how well you diverge from it. One is how well you do it. The other is how well you don't do it. And these two things are actually opposites. So take three short examples. First, Nelson, what we've just been talking about. In the beginning of the battle, all of the ships follow the plan. They have high tactical performance. Once the battle becomes unpredictable, all of the captains adapt. Think about another example, a business example. Imagine that we were all going to run a customer service center, a call center. And all of us would probably do a pretty good job of setting up the tactical performance. We'd estimate how many calls we were going to come in, how long each service rep should spend on the phone. We'd probably put metrics and dashboards everywhere. But if you start to hammer down on tactical performance too much, you start to kill the adaptive. Have you ever been on the phone where you're talking to a customer service rep and you can tell that they're reading a script to you?